ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and very welcome to CEPS for this event of today, From Cost to Performance, which lessons from the Recovery and Resilience Facility. I'm Cinzia Alcidi, I'm Senior Fellow at CEPS, and I'm very pleased to moderate this session. We have an excellent lineup of speakers, and you will get to know them in a moment. Before starting the conversation, let me take a couple of minutes to set a bit the scene and also to introduce the speakers. So, as many of you may know, we are all part of the Brussels bubble, so that there is a lot of attention around the RRF. The RRF has now reached its midway point. It was launched in 2020. It's supposed to close in 2026, so 2023 really marked the halfway. And in conjunction with this phase, with the finalization of this first part of the RRF, the European Commission has published about 1 month ago the midterm evaluation. Now, at CEPS, we have been working quite a lot on the RRF since the early stage, and also on the national plans, and we had the opportunity to be part of the consortium which prepared the study supporting the midterm evaluation. And this was really the opportunity to collect a huge amount of information. I guess you can imagine how big was the effort actually to try to get a sense of the progress that each and every country in the EU had made until basically mid-2023. And now at this stage, I think that the most important aspect to discuss is not necessarily what each and every member state has achieved, not each and every target or milestone in each and every country. I think this is a good moment to take stock of what kind of lessons can be learned from the RRF, given that this is a new instrument. The RRF, we didn't have anything comparable to the RRF before COVID. Other than being probably the biggest financial instrument that we have at the EU level, it also entailed the design of a new approach in the way the EU funds have been disbursed. And this is basically the main point of discussion of today. So the RRF marks a deviation, if you want, compared to the traditional approach that is used in the allocation of EU funds. So it is a move away from the cost to the performance. So funds are disbursed based on the achievement of certain objectives, reforms, targets, milestones. We will discuss this a bit more in detail. But I think it's a good moment really to have a discussion about what we can learn from this experience. What are the weaknesses, but also what are the strengths of this new approach, and whether this new approach actually could set the stage for a different way in which EU funds are allocated more broadly, beyond the RRF and beyond the duration of the RRF. Of course, this is gaining a lot of attention in the policy debate with critics and supporters. And I think that the discussion that we have today is really around this, really learning and exchanges about this new approach. So, with this question in mind, we managed to set up I think a very good panel of speakers. So we will start with a very brief presentation based on the study by my colleague Francesco Corti, who will join us in a few minutes. He's research fellow at CEPS. And together with him, Daniel Nigosian is a principal consultant at Ecoris and he co-led the consortium with Francesco. Then to my right, Géraldine Mailleux She is director at the European Commission, DG ECFIN, and she is in charge of investment growth and structural reforms. And then to my left, Atanas Pekanov. Atanas is currently economist at WIFO, the Austrian Institute of Economic Research. But Atanas was also Deputy Prime Minister of Bulgaria in 2021, actually twice, under two different caretaker governments. And as I was not long ago in the same panel as Atanas, as the moderator at that time said, Atanas has a Wikipedia page, which is something that is quite exceptional, not least because of his young age. So congratulations, Atanas. And then not sitting with us, but on screen, I hope, I know they are connected. We have Olga Verdugo. She is deputy head of unit for programming of the Recovery and Resilience Plan at the Ministry of Finance of Spain. Olga, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Welcome to this event. And then, last but not least, Chiara Pancotti. She is a partner and a senior researcher at Exil in Milano, and she was also part of the consortium which prepared the study on the midterm evaluation. Now, with this introduction, I would like to hand over the floor to Daniel for a short introductory presentation. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cinzia. And it would be great if we can go back to the presentation. I'm happy to see so many people interested in the RRF. I mean, this was one of the most difficult, fastest, at the same time evaluation that we did. And I knew it was an important one because then it was the first evaluation after which I got interviewed from some journalists. It was the first evaluation where I actually got to speak to a minister. And actually, I got to like the minister. So, Atanas, it was a pleasure meeting you back then. It's a pleasure to meet you again. Having said that, and considering that we don't have much time before Francesco arrives, hopefully, let's see whether that's the case, let me briefly introduce the study that we did, the midterm evaluation of the RRF. I mean, during the course of the evaluation, we constantly heard the RRF is a new instrument and it's a steep learning curve. And I think what you're going to see now might be a bit old news because we did the evaluation last year. It was published in February, but we did it last year. So some of the information that we are going to present is a bit old, but it's good because we have Geraldine, so she can correct me as I speak. What I'm going to present is very briefly just introduce the evaluation. Then I will take stock of where the RRF is, or rather was, last year. And then for the key lessons learned, we will have Francesco briefly presenting. Right. The evaluation was a classical evaluation in the sense of covering the key evaluation criteria, like effectiveness, efficiency, relevance, coherence, and EU added value. It was, of course, meant to feed into the staff working document of the Commission, which, as you can see in the slide, was due and was published in February this year. And one of the key elements of the study was actually to say, okay, the performance-based approach, is it a good idea or is it not? Which I believe is the key topic of today. In terms of whole setup, the scope of the evaluation, it was a midterm evaluation. So many of the people that we talked to said it's too early to evaluate the recovery and the resilience facility. But of course, we had to. And I think it wasn't necessarily too early because it still allowed us to draw some lessons learned. In terms of the cutoff date of the evaluation, most of the data that we used was July last year. That's why I started with discover that everything I say might be a bit old news for most of you. But we tried to update the data to the extent possible. Now, just immediately going through some of the conclusions. I mean, the report is published again. I mean, it's a dense report. It's not the easiest read because we had more than 20 evaluation questions. It's a lot, so I'm just going to focus on a couple of key points. First of all, in terms of financial implementation. I mean, the key message that we had during the evaluation was that, yeah, in the first 2 years, 2021, 2022, the progress of the RRF was, well, good. It was pretty much in line with the expectations for the first 2 years. There were more than 150 billion that were disbursed under the RRF, and that's a huge amount for only 2 years. I mean, sometimes people can forget how big the RRF is. And there is, of course, a but looking into the data for 2023, it was already kind of obvious that, well, there were huge risks of delay. Yeah, I mean, we added a bit of, I added this morning a little bit of new data from the RRF scoreboard. So you can see that, yeah, in mid-July it was 150 billion. Now it's more than 220. So yes, there is progress. But nonetheless, 2023 was quite a difficult year, I think, for the RRF. So there were delays in terms of member states submitting their payment requests. So in 2023, most payment requests by national authorities were delayed. What were the reasons for that? Well, one obvious one was, well, member states just couldn't quite reach the milestones and the targets that they had planned. So that's quite objective. A little bit of a subjective one was this ambition of fulfilling all the milestones and targets before asking for payments. But then, of course, the Commission actually clarified that this doesn't always need to be the case. But I think the main reason was that last year there were quite a few amendments to the National Recovery and Resilience Plans, including the REPowerEU chapters. So that led to slowing down of the financial implementation. But as Cinzia said, this is a new approach. So if the financial implementation is slowed down, this is due to the actual performance of the RRF and the countries asking for payments. In terms of the disbursement, so was maybe the Commission to blame for slow disbursements? Well, we don't think so, because when we looked at the dates of disbursements, they were pretty much within less than 4 months on average, which cannot really shift the blame for slow disbursements to the Commission. It was rather the member states not fulfilling the milestones and targets that were planned. Having said that, though, again in 2023 we noticed slowing down of the disbursement schedule. So also the processing of payment requests just took longer time than was planned. We did an SME survey, so some of the participants were complaining that the money, after it was disbursed to the member state authorities, was delayed in terms of reaching out to the actual end beneficiaries or final recipients, or whatever we want to call them, because the terminology is a bit particular for the RRF. So, yeah, good progress in the first 2 years, but then delays afterwards. It's a complicated slide, but pretty much a message that I hope is clear. Another novelty of the Recovery and Resilience Facility was that it actually made a direct link to the country-specific recommendations. So finally, the Commission had a tool which allowed to have a carrot, pretty much. So it wasn't just country-specific recommendations, but there was also payment that was directly or indirectly linked to that. And most of the stakeholders that we interviewed actually praised this approach as something that finally would push countries into making reforms that maybe they didn't want to implement before. I think Francesco had some examples. I don't know whether he would like to share them, but for example, the labor market, pension system in Spain, some investment bottlenecks in Germany. I think, one or two examples from Belgium could also be a good case. But that goes down to this question of what was the added value of the Recovery and Resilience Facility? What did it bring on top of what countries would have done anyway? And there was an overall positive assessment mostly by the stakeholders on the EU added value. But then there was also this hanging question all the time, okay, but which reforms wouldn't have been done anyway? And it pretty much boiled down to whom do we speak to and what do we look into. We had a macroeconomic model, and it always helps when you have a macroeconomic model, because you can say, okay, well, this is the added value. When we ran the numbers, there were quite obvious positive effects in terms of GDP, reducing unemployment and spreads. Were they enough? Well, according to the Financial Times, no. So it did have an article on the RRF pretty much which coincided with the publishing of the staff working document. But they were there. So there were effects on GDP, reducing unemployment and spreads. Most stakeholders said, yes, this is a meaningful approach, and the RRF brings additionality that is positive. And yes, we had some examples where reforms probably wouldn't have happened without the RRF. I'm pretty sure actually Atanas can testify for it, some related to the judicial system in Bulgaria. We, of course, also had this almost a silly exercise. We just saw, okay, what is the percentage of milestones targets that were implemented before the date of the official endorsement of the RRPs? And, well, we noticed that about 20% were endorsed before. Of course, that doesn't rule additionality completely off, because there were these informal discussions taking place between member states and the Commission. So I'm not saying that the Commission had no leverage over the countries. So it's just pure maths, before, after. And at the same time, not all participants said, okay, well, the RRF really had added value, especially when we talked with some, well, let me call them more frugal or northern countries. They said, well, look, when it comes to the RRF, the reforms in it, well, they were already pretty much just our government program. So in that regard, for some countries, the RRF didn't contribute that much. Before I start to sound like doom and gloom, just the final slide on my end, and I'll pass it on to Francesco for some lessons learned. Of course, there were some objective external factors that led to some delays in the implementation of the RRF. I mean, it was clear, high inflation, pressure on energy, food, and other community prices. All of this increased the prices, and that also, in a way, is a good contribution to this discussion on the performance-based approach. Because with the performance-based approach, you need to set the targets and the milestones way in advance, like 4 or 5 years ahead of implementation. Well, but inflation was not factored into this, or at least not to the extent that it was reasonably possible to factor it in. There were also some more internal factors, some related to cross-border projects, but I think the key factor was the one that everybody would have expected, and those were just some changes in governments or some governmental priorities across countries. Having said that, Francesco, would you like to take over? It is the remote.
Oh, so first of all, I apologize for the delay. I'm very sorry for that. And let me continue on what Daniel has been basically presenting to you. But to a certain extent, the reason of the delay was a reason related to the success of the RRF, which is about monitoring and evaluation. When we look at this new performance-based approach, and that was, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we had with this evaluation when we started it, it was we were not dealing with cohesion policy. So we were really dealing with an instrument that implied per se a new learning process in all national administration. It was not the business as usual. It was about milestone and target. It was something that was for a long time discussed at the OECD, at the World Bank, at the IMF, the importance of shifting towards performance budgeting. And in this case, it was a very ambitious performance budgeting. It was performance budgeting linking the fulfillment of milestone and targets to the actual disbursement of EU funds. If you take out the pre-financing part, which was still member states had to deliver afterwards milestone and targets, but then member states had really to show that they have delivered what they've promised. And this created, first of all, I think, and it was quite well shared among the large majority of member states, a new evaluation culture, which is not to be underestimated, because it created and triggered an interest in policymakers in actually shifting towards performance approaches and looking at results. Because this came with more predictability, so you commit over a time span to deliver a certain number of milestone and targets linked to reforms and investments, and you cannot deviate of that unless for justified objectives, as it is foreseen by the regulation, you decide to change the plan. But also in that case, what you are changing is maybe you readjust your milestone and targets based on the objective circumstances, but you do not deviate from the goal. And especially this is particularly true for reforms. So this predictability when it comes to the implementation of reforms, and then I think for good reason, one of the elements that pops up in the study were all front-loaded because it was important. And Daniel mentioned earlier on the fact that one of the implementation obstacles in RRF plans was the instability of governments. So one of the positive aspects of the RRF is that it forced or it accelerated the decision of governments to front-load reforms compared to investments. And that was very positive, especially in some countries. I don't have to name the usual suspect, but Italy, Spain, it was very important to front-load reforms. But also, a predictability comes together with accountability. Because not only we as researchers have we been looking at the RRF and the RRF implementation, but also social patrons, civil society, they have been looking at the RRF plans and have looked at its implementation, and governments were accountable for that. And the fact of establishing ex-ante milestone and targets over a lifespan of 6 years of the RRF also was a way to not only improve the transparency of policy planning to a certain extent, but also to improve its efficiency on the one hand, but also with all the caveats that Daniel has illustrated on administrative capacity. But at the same time, it acted, now there is a word in the literature I know that I'm particularly fond of, which is vincolo esterno, but the RRF really introduced a positive vincolo esterno which has been in the academic literature traditionally associated with a negative view, so an imposition, but the ownership that was behind the National Recovery and Resilience Plans really triggered a positive vincolo esterno, so a positive external constraints that was used by national governments to accelerate it on reforms that were particularly needed, and the data that Daniel has showed on CSR's implementation, I think they are quite telling. But also investments that were quite important. Now, obviously, as any discussion on a new instrument, as I said at the beginning, it comes with a learning curve, which is automatic in any public administration, but nonetheless, it comes with some rumors, some insatisfaction, some complaints about administrative burden, about something that could have been done better, something that could have been done in a different way. So what we do in the study is trying to assess what were the main, let's say, concerns that have been put on this new performance-based approach, what has not worked, what could have been done differently. But also we try to assess it based on, first of all, the actual information that were available and our own assessment. One of the main concerns that have been raised by member states, which in our study we actually argue that these concerns were in part not justified, is the assessment of milestone and targets. How does the Commission assess these milestone and targets? Are so important because disbursement depends on their fulfillment. Is the actual way the Commission assesses milestone and targets clear, transparent enough? And what we find actually is that at least with what concerns assessing milestone and targets, it's pretty straightforward and clear how the Commission does it. Obviously, with the Commission communication of February 2023, this became even further clearer because it was put black on white. If we wish, there is a whole list of documents that are used to assess the milestone and targets, the sources that are being used, but also there is a clarification on a limited number of circumstances and application of the so-called de minimis principle when it comes to the deviation that is allowed in the milestone and targets fulfillment, to consider them as actually fulfilled. Another aspect that has been raised when it comes to concerns or preoccupation on the implementation of this new performance-based approach is that this potential lack of transparency in the assessment of milestone and targets could have then affected the length of the disbursement procedure. There has been question raised on whether a partial fulfillment of milestone and targets, how this would have translated into the actual partial disbursement of the pre-agreed disbursement, keeping in mind that the timeline of the disbursement of the installments disbursement is something that is not set in stone, meaning that member states can actually decide by themselves, and it happened in many member states that they decide to postpone the request for an installment. So the fact that when we look also at the speed of the disbursement and we see that there is what is called wrongly, I think, a delay. Sometimes it's just the member states that decide because of different reasons, maybe because of a pension reform that is particularly difficult to agree upon at the government level, then you have to postpone it, and so you postpone all the installment. And also in that respect, when it comes to the disbursement procedure, what emerges from our study is that in the communication of February 2023, it is quite well illustrated how does it work, not only the disbursement procedure, but also the partial disbursement and the use of the coefficients rate for reforms and investments. Maybe the aspects where there is still margin for improvement is obviously on some concerns that have been highlighted and emerged in the study that we have done with respect to administrative burden. With the caveat in mind that for a new instrument, the learning curve should kind of allow ourselves a little bit more of flexible, or at least a better, more let's say the understanding that obviously when there is a new instrument, there is also something that could be adjusted in the working progress, let's say. And one of the aspects that has been highlighted as being particularly painful is on plans modification. Now, in the study we say it, I think, pretty clearly that there are some steps that are foreseen by the regulation, like the fact that whatever the kind of change you introduce in the plan, you have the usual step via a demand to the Commission does its own assessment, and then it has to go via the Council. And that's a demand to a certain extent by the member states themselves. Now, this might imply 4 weeks of waiting, but this is foreseen by the regulation, that the actors around the table in February 2021 decided to agree upon. So on the one hand, we understand the fact that member states demand for a more accelerated path, especially when it comes to a small modification of the plan. But at the same time, we cannot, if you wish, change what is foreseen by the regulation. Another observation that popped up in several member states is when we modify the plan, we should take into account about the different types of investments. And what we mean by types of investment, the member states tend to say, if we have a kind of, new hydrogen investment that Daniel has mentioned earlier on, the difficulties that are related also to cross-border projects, so where you might encounter some delays, but also they are related to the innovative, let's say, area in which you are investing, you should allow more flexibility compared to if you do an investment in a more traditional area that might be investing in childcare facility, where the problems that popped up in the RRF implementation, they were the same problems that were there with the cohesion policy funds related to administrative capacity. So the point of this suggestion for us, so having a differentiated approach depending on the type of investment, we understand the logic behind, but it's very difficult to operationalize this. So how can you have a more flexible approach to performance budgeting depending on the type of investment? I'm going to be quicker. Reporting requirements. This is the usual suspect. Administrative burden is in whatever kind of occasion, be it cohesion policy, be it the RRF, there will be always administrative burden, and it's a usual complaint. Two areas, common indicators and biannual reporting. The biannual reporting is by regulation. There is reporting on common indicators as there is reporting on milestone and targets. One interesting suggestion that came in the consultation with the different actors for the midterm evaluation study was distinguishing between backward-looking reporting and forward-looking reporting, meaning if member states already submit information on milestone and target when they ask for the installment disbursement, it is done backward-looking, so on what they have already implemented, and they usually report it already, especially bigger member states or bigger beneficiaries, already 2 times a year on that. So why having on top of that also reporting in the 2 slots that are foreseen by the regulation? By contrast, what everyone kind of acknowledges as being very important is forward-looking reporting. So what member states have to do is to report whether they foresee some delays on the milestone and targets that they will have to implement in the year to come. So one of the proposals that emerged in the discussion we have with all the stakeholders consulting was maybe we should foresee only the forward-looking reporting and not the backward-looking reporting, which is already done by member states in the when they have to ask for the disbursement request. And then there is a little bit more of a controversial issue, which is common indicators. The opinion there of member states is very clear. We don't want to report on common indicators, or maybe we do it voluntarily, which is we don't do that. The point there is, again, it's foreseen by the regulation. So we kind of understand from an independent perspective that obviously there is a structural problem with the common indicators, which is many times you do not link properly what you are measuring with these indicators with the measures related in the RRF. So not necessarily the common indicators, they do reflect what is the outcome related to the specific reforms and investments. So to a certain extent, we understand the complaint that is raised by member states, that they say this is not a performance-based indicator, but this is deregulation. So what we point out here is obviously for the future, some reflection might be needed. I focus on the last element, controls and audits. Also, this has been object of a huge debate, I think, that we are all aware of. What we stress in the midterm evaluation supporting study, however, is that this lack of clarity that is hinted by some actors, we do not find it in the regulation as it is, neither in the guidelines that has been published in 2021. For us, it's very clear when we read the guidelines and the regulation of the RRF, who are the actors that are responsible for audit and control at national level and at the EU level, the Commission. Any additional layer of audit and control is perceived by member states as an additional burden, and to a certain extent, this is not helping an approach, let's say a positive approach towards the RRF, because it creates, even in the countries that are the best sponsor of the RRF, that are very happy with whatever they pointed, why we should do these additional layers of audit and control. And there we have a kind of unanimous feeling across member states that the sooner we solve this issue, the better it is in terms of implementation of the RRF, because the risk inherent is that we shift away from the logic of performance and we end up in a sort of cost justification approach where we have to justify to multiple layers, not only at the national level, not only at the commission level, what we have been doing, and so we have to justify again what has been done to fulfill the milestone and targets. And this obviously creates a lot of problems. And with this, Chins, I think I pass you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesco and Daniel, for this overview. These are basically the views of the independent experts, so quite broad positive assessment until now. Quite a lot of lessons learned, especially based on listening to the member states that they have to implement. But now it's time to open the debate and to basically listen those who have been involved actually in the implementation of the plan. Plans. Let me just say that we are on the Chatham House rules. So if there are journalists in the room, you are free to refer to the discussions that we are having, but please do not attribute any sentence or statement. Thank you for this. I would like now to pass the floor to Geraldine. We are speaking about a performance-based approach. How was this conceived initially in the RRF, and what is your learning experience after 3 years of implementation?
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Good presentation, which I think overall is, we share the large of the view, and indeed we produced a staff working document on the basis of the study, but it is with some spin a bit different, but generally we agree on the main conclusion. So how was it, I mean, to answer your question, how was it conceived? So I think the breakthrough that we tried to make was twofold. We wanted really to use the funds much better to leverage on reforms. This has been tried in the past. We was not successful, and that was the priority, is really to use the fund and condition that on some achievement of reform, and to do so not on the basis of looking at the cost, but really on looking at whether results have been achieved on the ground before disbursing the fund. So this logic of performance base was really super important for us, and I think that, oh yeah, we'll talk about it later. I think we've managed and we've delivered quite a bit on CSRs, implementation, and so on. So now there are two aspects that I would like to nuance, where to some extent we have moved. We started with a completely pure performance-based approach, but at the end we were pushed a bit in a hybrid world to some extent, and for two reasons. So in the beginning, because the RF is conceived based on a predecessor program, which at the end we changed it, which was the reform delivery tool, which was part of the reform support program. And at the time, you had no estimated cost, so it was purely based on performance and based on reforms, no estimated cost. And there was also no idea regarding Article 22, which we added afterward, which is this audit and control approach. So, but then in the context of the start of the negotiation of even this reform delivery tool, which became big for the ones who follow a bit the evolution, member state and some of in particular the Nordics say, yeah, but that doesn't work. We need to know what we're paying for. You cannot pay us without knowing what is the investment behind it. So we start with this concept of reform investment and then having an estimated cost. So there was one change. And then during also the negotiation, even after we had adopted, the proposal by the Commission on reform on the RF, we were asked by the European Council to reinforce this dimension of protection of the financial interest of the Union, and therefore we added this Article 22, which says that the member states are responsible for the implementation of national and EU rules, but the Commission has a residual responsibility. If the member states do not act upon it, we act upon it. And these two changes change a bit the nature of the performance nature of the instrument. And the first, that these ex-ante estimated costs, which it's in a certainly good, because it means that member states need to justify what they are going to do with the money, and we have an idea, okay, the money that you are giving you is more or less in line with the spending that you are going to do, which is essentially investment. So that's good, and we can also use that as to target basically what is the share of investment in green, in digital, and so on and so forth, so that has a lot of benefit. The problem is that then this creates a confusion for many member states and for many actors, and for the European auditor in particular. Say, yeah, okay, but then since you have the estimated cost, please tell us the actual cost. And we told, yeah, but we don't know the actual cost. So that is a bit of a problem that we have created. So a lot of demand also for pillar reporting expenditure, and we always said in the regulations that it's based on estimated cost and the breakdown, but people want to know more about the actual cost, which we don't have. So that's one. And then on the Article 22, as Francesco has explained, it has blurred a bit I mean, we had a very clear idea that we check the Commission on milestones and target, and member state checks on the implementation. So it becomes national funds, state aid, procurement, so on. But because of the Article 22, which was this residual responsibility, actors such as the Parliament and the ECA said, yeah, but it's not clear anymore what you are responsible for, so please do more audit. So we had to do more audit on state aid, procurement, so on and so forth, which initially we didn't intend to do because we felt that it was the responsibility of the member state. But since the court concluded that you have an assurance gap, we had to act upon it. So this is so, in a certain way, yes, we had a performance base, but then we had to modify it to a certain extent, and this is things that we need to take into account for the future. Now, maybe I'll be more short on the lessons learned, because I think there are pros and cons, because Francesco has and Daniel have mentioned it as well, but clearly for the advantage for us, and in this fundamental improvement of the reform implementation, this is a clear advantage. We've seen it. CSR implementation have increased by almost 20 basis points if you look at the ones that are from 19, while in the past it was like much lower than that in terms of improving over 2 years. You had 7 percentage points. So clearly this has led to result. Now, whether it would have been done anyway, I think it's a bit of a fake argument, because nobody knows what would have happened anyway, so honestly. But if you look at what has been the performance before in terms of CSR implementation, it was very low. So I think that the results show that it wouldn't have happened anyway. And it's not because it is a government program that it would have happened, because I can tell you my country, this one would have been very different place if all what the politicians are putting in the government program is implemented. So I think that this is not a counterfactual. So I think that this is important. So, and we have loads of examples of results on the ground. Just to see one example, we have 750,000 of households, for example, that have received subsidy on energy renovation. So just now, so it's a lot of Italy, which was, for example, running out 2,800 kilometers on this European rail traffic management system. So it's also something that they hadn't delivered before. So clearly performance-based nature worked for the delivery of reforms. Another is the sense of ownership, I think you've mentioned as well. So member states were given like a menu. You need to just address all these reforms, but the how they wanted to do it was really left to them, and there was a lot of dialogue with the member state, and that is perceived as very positively from the member state. I think this instrument was in a sort of way relatively flexible, in the sense that we managed, there was like, we had like 2 major crises. You had the COVID first, and then that led after that to the spike in inflation and supply chain, and then you had Ukraine. And for both of them, we managed to shape this instrument. So for the plans and the high inflation, we allowed member states to change their plan to take into account the inflation. And for Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine, by Russia, we allowed for this repower, so we add another part, another money, and we really try to shift and then focus really on measures that help really to reduce this dependence on fossil fuels. So, and I think we managed that quite well. I mean, the other quite important element is that the recovery, I mean, this is clear. I mean, everybody that looks at this could say that you have like a major reduction of the spread as soon as we have announced this. So you had also investment, public investment was maintained much higher in the previous crisis when you have the sovereign spread, where you had like really a collapse of public investment, because this is the first thing that any member state cuts. And here public investment has even increased when you compare between 2019 and 2023. So that I think is good. So that is on the positive. Now, on the negative part, one, and that has been mentioned also by Francesco, the administrative burden. Yes, member states have criticized, so it's much more, I mean, they said that the RF hasn't brought the simplification that everybody was expecting. To some extent, yes, it's true. And then it's true that, and they link it to audit and control, they link it to the fact that we have too many evidence to mention. But I think here it's also important to take a step back and say, listen, we are talking about 800 billion. So I think that to some extent, some member states had like preconceived idea that they would get the money without us to check. And no, we are going to check because we have to make sure that the money is well spent. So I think there are also, and some member states are comparing, yes, but I could have got the national fund and now I get the EU, and so I have more control to do. Yeah, of course, but and we as do, this is normal, it's not the same. So I think to some extent this, and then there is really a trade-off to find, and maybe the balance is not completely right, but between, I mean, the administrative burden, but the protection of the financial interest of the union. It's a bit the same for the burden between administrative, I mean, the balance between administrative burden and the transparency on common indicator. Member states are complaining about it, yes, true, but at the same time, we need to have like some indication of what is the money going to result at the end. And if you make it voluntary, nobody would report them, that is for sure. So I think this is important. And it's important also to not link the administrative burden with the delay in the implementation. It's not linked. So why are some member states not receive funding? Because they haven't delivered on their promises. This is it. So because they haven't delivered on adequate system for ensuring the protection of the financial interests of the union. So they didn't get the money. But that, I think, is a positive. It means that we are, I mean, the conditionality is biting, and that we require, you cannot have it all. Yes, if you make it on a good instrument, a conditionality, and the condition is strong. Yes, if you don't deliver, you don't get the money. So that is the reason why you don't have so much. But at the same time, as you said, Danielle, I think we have still delivered almost 225 billion, which in 3 years, nothing. So that I would say. So second lessons is the flexibility. The flexibility, yes, some members are saying we would want to have it more simple, the revision is too complicated, the payment is too complicated, and so on and so forth. And it's true, these milestones and targets are very detailed, and it forces us to look at every single aspect. Maybe we have been a bit too detailed in that, and then maybe we preached for too much transparency, but at the same time, it's important to also realize that there is again a trade-off here. You have flexibility, but at the same time, you need to have accountability, transparency, and then predictability. And if member states know exactly what they have to deliver, this is easier for them. And also, we are assessing what the result the council have put. So the more precise we are, so the more we are accountable to council. So there is again a trade-off, and we cannot rub it all. Otherwise, we'll be criticized the Commission as having a lot of discretion and so on. So again, you need granularity. Maybe we have been too far, but I think, and then the third lesson is on the administrative capacity, where I think here, indeed, we have realized that there is, and then Francesco, you mentioned as well, but usually it's in the country that had already problem in absorption and structural funds that are struggling more. And the more so that we have added cohesion to RF. So it's a lot of money. And so that is an issue that we need to still solve, I think, and we haven't finally solved. So in conclusion, I think that the RF has delivered. There are lessons that we are going to take for if ever the Commission introduce a new potential future performance-based instrument, which is not in the card for now because we are only in 2024, the next MFF in 2028, so we have a bit of time, but still. But in the meantime, I think that for us, the message now with the member states that you have 3 more years to deliver, and we need to deliver because 2026, after that, we cannot pay. And I'm stopping here.
Thank you very much, Geraldine, for this very rich overview. Let's now move to the view from the member states. And I would like to start with Atanas. Atanas, while you were in government, your main role was really the implementation of the RRF and the management of the EU funds. A lot of things have been said about the challenges, the problems, but also the successes. What is your experience? What is your lesson based really on your direct experience?
Okay. So thank you. Thanks a lot to the organizers. Thank you, Cinzia, Francesco, Daniel. Very interesting. I haven't read everything yet. It's only 500 pages, I think, but I kind of skimmed it through, and I think I share a lot of these views. By the way, it's a huge responsibility to be talking in the name of the member states. I'm not. I don't think I'm doing that, but okay. So let me share a bit of my insights, and I was very fortunate to have, I think, both the opportunity to see it from both viewpoints as a macroeconomist, because for many years we've been discussing, I believe, a tool that is necessary at the EU level, similar to what the RRF actually is, and then in terms of implementation. And I have to tell you, these two experiences cannot be more different from each other, because as a macroeconomist, you should imagine it as you are on this plane which is going through the country, and you see a beautiful farm, and it's amazing. This is this RRF. It's just beautiful from above, from 10,000 feet, right? It's I think what we would see as necessary for the common currency area. But when you have to walk through the farm, it has a lot of bumps and holes and difficulties to walk through it. And this was the implementation. So now let me say a couple of positive things, because I really believe that the RRF is a success. I think it's a success because we have to measure how it evolved, and how it evolved, if you think about it, on the 18th of May 2020, when it was the first announced by President Macron and by then Chancellor Merkel. It was a tool, first and foremost, for the crisis. It was a tool for economic recovery. So first and foremost, I believe, and many studies show, I think, that it contributed to calming down spreads, to avoiding panic in the markets, and to ensuring that there will be some form of fiscal stimulus in Europe. So on this first, I think there are 4 goals that it has to deal with. On this first, I think it did pretty well. On the second one, public investment. So guaranteeing, mostly, I think the best word is protecting public investment. Because as was said, we don't want to repeat the mistake of 10 years ago, when not even in the midst of the global financial crisis, but actually after that, in the fiscal consolidation period, this is when public investments suffer the most. This is when member states have to reduce government expenditure, and of course it's much more easy to delay some important public investment, because it will take anyways 5 years to do it, than cut social spending on our other programs. So I think as a protection of public investment, I think it's also efficient. Then it has a normative role, because we decided so, that it has to serve the twin transition, so it has to ensure the green and digital transition, and because a lot of the money is earmarked for it, I think it will also serve this goal. And on the fourth, I'm somehow split, so I'll give it only half the grade. This is on delivering on structural reforms. So on structural reforms, many things are moving, and I'll give some examples also from Bulgaria, but some things are not moving. And I will say why I don't see this as a problem. Overall, we get 3.5 of 4. I think this is the grade. And I think this is actually perfect. Why? You know, when you go somewhere to the most difficult exams, it's very difficult to get full points, right? That makes you actually strive for more. And I think this is exactly how we are with RRF. We're not going to get everything right from the first go, but that's not a problem. Now let me say a couple of critical things, because there are challenges. I see a lot of dangers which were in the implementation, but they are also conceptual. The first and biggest one, for sure, is political economy. This should be clear, I think. On one hand, this means that there are political cycles, and in a sense, Bulgaria was the most extreme example, because there were many governments changing all the time and changing the ideas behind the plan, in Italy as well. But this will happen until 2026 everywhere. And there is, of course, embedded incentive for a new government to say, why am I going to implement the program of the previous government? I have a better program, and I want to renegotiate. So this is a big problem that will happen everywhere sooner or later. There are some countries which are very fortunate, I think, they will have most probably the same government throughout from 2020 to 2027. And you will actually see that these are the countries that are performing the best. If you look who was the first country that got the fourth payment, the fastest country, this is a country with a stable government that got re-elected last summer, and I think it will continue performing well. On the political economy side, there is a second problem, which could be seen if you look at, and I'm not going to name countries, but there were 2 countries which were the latest with signing their operational agreements for completely different reasons, on the 2 spectrum of why they don't do it. But there are some incentives in terms of political appetite in implementing the RRF. For some, maybe because it's not a lot of money. For others, because it's too difficult in terms of delivering on the reforms. Then there is the problem of, inflation. Inflation was a big shock. I did a study some months ago for the European Parliament, evaluating what we thought the Bulgarian RRP will cost back end of 2021, beginning of 2022, before the inflation shock. And basically from that point until 2026, it should have accumulated inflation of around 10% if we were at the 2% inflation target. Instead, the expected accumulated inflation from 2021 to 2026 will be around 30%. I did the study by looking at each of the projects and knowing that, okay, some of these projects are extremely focused on construction, for example. There, the cost increase in the last year was immense. So this is, I think, funding that is now either we're going to have to drop some projects or it's going to be missing. So this is a problem. Administrative burden was mentioned. Administrative burden is an issue, but exactly as Geraldine said, it's not the issue with the Commission. The Commission is bound to check everything, and they're right to do it. The issue is with member states, because all of a sudden there is new tools that they don't know. Yes, they will learn. Yes, that's true, but it takes time, and this slows down the process. And I think this is part of the delay now. And the fourth thing that I think is the most difficult, and here I'll give a bit of examples from Bulgaria, is the lack of institutional flexibility. It's true that this is how the RRF is conceived. Everything has to be proven in terms of milestones and targets. It's true that member states have to deliver on the structural reforms that are necessary, but we also have to understand that not everything will be delivered. I'll give two examples from Bulgaria, the most difficult reforms in Bulgaria. The first one was on the rule of law, which was very difficult, something that we got a lot of criticism and recommendations for many years. I was a huge proponent that needs to happen, and I think also in the broader society also there was mostly support for this, and this is why it happened at the end. At the beginning the parties were not very willing to do that, but they then realized, okay, this is important, this is also connected now with the funding, and I do think that the RRF was the main driver of actually we pushed the reforms in the judiciary sector, even without actually a stable government. This was in the technical government. The biggest reform on the general prosecutor was done. We persuaded the technical government, persuaded the parliament that this needs to be done, and then it was dropped from the rule of law report because we finally complied with this. But in the area of decarbonization, I don't see enough flexibility in terms of how unpopular some of these measures are and how much things have changed since 2021. I, for example, am a proponent of the Green Deal, and I think we have to achieve a lot of the decarbonization targets. But huge parts of the Bulgarian population, maybe rightly so, are scared because they fear deindustrialization, they fear that the closure of coal plants will take a lot of jobs in these regions. And of course, I agree. There was a study by the Commission recently, by the chief energy economist, saying, yeah, if you do now renewables, in 2030 you will be extremely competitive because most of the time they will be setting the price, and this will help your industry. Yeah, that's right. But it's very difficult to say to the people that are fearing that they will lose their job tomorrow or next year. It doesn't matter for them that in 5 years they will be very competitive in the region. So on this, things have also changed, because in 2021 it was much easier to move on these topics. Last year with the energy crisis, with a resource which is a sovereign resource, coal, it was very difficult to move, and here I think the lacking flexibility in terms of adjusting to these changing circumstances is going to hurt the RRF. And to finalize, so now a lot of economists were using this metaphor of the marathon. So Isabel Schnabel introduced it and said, okay, the last mile in terms of inflation is the most difficult one. I'm actually not sure. Well, I never ran the marathon, which is very bad. I really wanted to, but then there was the pandemic, and then I was in government. I would do it at some point. But I thought about this. I'm not sure the last mile is the most difficult. I think somewhere after half of it, it's the most difficult, because you realize how much more there is. And I think this is exactly where we are now with RRF. And we should be very careful not to push ourselves too hard, because then we will actually not finish. We have to think that we have to finish it in the pace necessary, given the ability of different member states to actually implement reforms, not all of the reforms. As I said, we will not do everything in one go, but actually this will leave us the strength and motivation to then do the next marathon, because I see it as a successful and important tool, and we have to realize that maybe not everything will be perfect, but that is why we'll then be able to do it again, and it is necessary at the European level. A lot of these things sound very technical, but actually they are things that create added value for European citizens. A lot of the investments in Bulgaria, for example, would not have happened without the RRF. There are things that people like. Some of the reforms also would not have happened without the RRF. So this is the added value, but we have to explain it also to be a bit more humble that, well, we are not going to do it in one go, but we have to continue and push forward.
Thank you very much, Atanas. This was really very interesting, and it confirms the fact that it's always nice to bring the view from the capitals and the member states into the Brussels bubble to have a bit more also concrete discussion. And I would like to continue on this line by calling Olga to take part in the discussion. Olga, Spain is one of the largest beneficiary of the RRF, and it has implemented a lot of reforms and achieved a high number of milestones and targets. I would like to ask you to share with us your experience, how you are looking at what has been done over the last 3 years, and in particular your experience concerning the performance-based approach. The floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And well, unfortunately, I can't be there with you in person, but I will try to share with you our experience, the Spanish experience in the managing of this new system of managing European funds. And I can share with you, or I can agree practically with all the conclusions and all the issues that have already been raised by the previous colleagues. And first of all, I would like to say that for us, for Spain, the RRF is already having very good effects in the Spanish economy, and it has had from the beginning the strong commitment from the central government and the rest of the levels of the administration. As you have very well pointed out, Spain is one of the major beneficiaries of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, with more than 160 billion euros in grants and loans. And well, I would like to remark the dimension of our Recovery and Resilience Plan, because it has conditioned the way we are managing it. We are talking about a very ambitious plan, with more than 200 reforms and investments in almost every economic area, from training, education, health, to energy infrastructure, even culture or sports. Consequently, the number of commitments in the form of milestones and targets is also very, very high. And such a big plan in a country like Spain, as you may know, we have a very decentralized administrative, high level of decentralization. And this has implied the involvement of a huge number of participants, both in the public sector, in all the levels of the administration, from the central administration to the regional and local one, to the private sector. And the good management of all these participants, of all these stakeholders, requires high levels of commitment and coordination. And the performance-based system is something relatively new for our public administration, and this has, I would say, changed the way of functioning of our internal services. But it has also changed the way we relate with the European Commission services. And well, I would like to point out this fact because, from my point of view, it's key for the successful implementation of the plans. Having an agile and fluid relation with the European Commission, and this is something that I consider positive. And well, another positive aspect of the RRF that you have already highlighted is that this instrument is based not only on the implementation of investments, but also it takes into account the approval of reforms. Well, in the case of Spain, as you very well know, and some of the colleagues have already mentioned, we have passed many reforms in different areas like labor market, pension system, or for example, the law for startups in among others. No? So I think that this is very positive, but because it has underpinned the approval of these necessary and positive reforms. Obviously, it is not always easy, especially when the political situation is not stable enough. In our case, well, we have sometimes difficulties to pass laws as we don't always have the necessary majorities. So, well, we can present this as an advantage, but also it implies difficulties in the process. And regarding the investments, it is true that it's important that with these new instruments that has direct as to a certain point the investments to the green and digital transition that are so necessary, but giving the member states the freedom, the ownership to design their own policies. And I think that this is something that is positive too, and it has to be mentioned. Needless to say that the implementation of the recovery and resilience plans is a real challenge for us, and I would say that for all the countries like Spain that have ambitious recovery and resilience plans. And obviously, it's not an easy process. We are finding some difficulties, some challenges, and well, the main ones have already been mentioned. I would like to maybe to highlight the tightness of the deadlines and a certain lack of flexibility. On the one hand, the finalization of strategic investments expected to have long-lasting impact. The finalization in 2026 of this investment is a challenge, especially those that have been planned in the process of the addenda, and those that are contained in the Repower chapter. These short deadlines may, up to a certain point, reduce the ambition of the plans that are called to transform the European economies. And regarding flexibility, yes, I would say that we need more flexibility in the process of assessment of the milestones and targets. We understand that this is difficult, but we have to find a balanced approach between assessing the performance and being agile enough. The regulation establishes short periods of time to carry out this assessment, and we think that this is sometimes incompatible with the detailed verifications we are experiencing. We have the feeling that sometimes these assessments are becoming more similar to audit process. This is something that has been highlighted in the midterm review report, this overlapping among the different layers of audits and controls that we are experiencing. And for us, this is key because it reduces the attractiveness of this useful instrument that is the RRF. We should bear in mind the necessity of avoiding excessive administrative burden and imposing additional requirements that go sometimes beyond the national ones. Well, I think that assessing performance is not easy. It's not an easy task. I imagine it is easier evaluating invoices like in the cost-based methodology. And in addition, we don't have previous experience in a similar system. We can say that we are learning by doing. and this obviously is a challenge for all the parties that are involved, not only for the member states that are sometimes struggling to fulfill all the milestones and targets in time, but also to the rest of stakeholders, European Commission, the European audits, and so on. However, I think that this is an important issue that we have to reflect on it, because at the end, I think that we have a common goal, that is making a success of this instrument. So to conclude, I would say that the performance-based system has introduced very positive elements. And in the case of Spain, I can say that there are a lot of reforms that have already been done, a lot of support schemes that are having real impact on our citizens, our enterprises. It has changed the way of functioning in many aspects of our public administrations and the way of relating with the European institutions. And I think this is very positive, but obviously there are still some margin of improvement. And well, these kind of events are very useful, and this kind of debates and reflections. And well, this is all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Olga, for sharing your experience and for sharing really the positive and the negative. We have quite a lot of overlaps in terms of the assessment. So somehow there is a broad agreement on what has worked and what could be improved. Maybe we can have a further discussion later on. But I would like now to move to Chiara. Chiara, in the preparation of the study, you focused on the comparison between RRF and cohesion funds. And we mentioned several times the cost-based approach and the fact that the RRF is a deviation compared to the past. What is the main message that basically comes out from your analysis and what you have contributed in the report?
Thank you, Cinzia, for these questions, and thank you for the opportunity of being here and participating in this interesting event. So in the context of the midterm evaluation, as you said, we conducted specifically a case study trying to investigate a little bit more in depth the interplay and to some extent compare the RRF with the cohesion policy across multiple dimensions. We did not only focus, of course, on the performance-based aspect, but the case study covered a much broader topic. But across the various dimensions that we try to compare, there is the payment system. So first of all, let's remind the key difference. So within the framework of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the EU financial support is provided using the so-called financing not linked to cost model. That means that basically member states receive funding upon the achievements of previously established milestones and targets. Instead, cohesion policy finance operation primarily, but not only, based on reimbursements of incurred costs. While it's important to stress the fact that I thought it is overwhelmingly remained really the payment is really nowadays still linked to the cost incurred. I mean, in the last programming period, there have been changes, even in the context of cohesion policy, to try to increase this so-called performance orientation. So in 2014-2020 period, the simplified cost option was introduced and was used to some extent, especially in the ESF, trying to a little bit overcome the standard payment based on costs incurred. Moreover, starting from 2019, member states could also opt for financing not linked to cost model. I have to say that in the past programming period, the model was very little used. So only Austria decided to use such a model. But in the current programming period, so 2021-2027, the orientation towards a more performance-based system has also took really place in the cohesion policy context. And there have been important steps to really try to increase the use of the simplified cost option, and also the use of the financing not linked to cost. However, as I said before, the majority of funds under cohesion policy remains really based on the so-called cost incurred. So, as highlighted before also by Francesco and others, what emerged from the case study is that the shift towards the performance-based budgeting in the Recovery and Resilience Facility has been really welcome by most of the member states. So it has been really perceived as a positive innovation. And the shift is considered really effective because it's ensured predictability and accountability through clear ex-ante definition of milestones and targets, and the establishment of a clear timeline for implementation. Having said that, in the context of the case study, we also conducted documentary review, literature review, and it is important also to stress the fact that the Recovery and Resilience Facility approach has been subject to various criticism. They were also recalled before by even by Geraldine. And among the criticism, there is also the one that it is not really being performance-based. So the European Court of Auditors, for instance, assessed the Recovery and Resilience Facility performance monitoring framework as very capable of measuring implementation progress, but not sufficient to capture performance. And apart from the ECA report, there is also literature that has come to the similar conclusions. What has been really noticed is the fact that the key weaknesses of the Recovery and Resilience Facility milestones and targets lie in their focus on input and output rather than results, even if we call it results-based. And if you look into the milestones and targets in actually the definition of the milestones and target, it is, I mean, this criticism is quite clear. But beyond that, I think that the main takeaway from the case study is that even if originally the RRF was expected to lead to a reduction in administrative burden as compared to cohesion policy, specifically because of its performance-based system approach, in reality, there is no evidence so far supporting this claim. So, national authority highlighted that the procedures for preparing the payment requests under the Recovery and Resilience Facility is as burdensome as those under cohesion policy. Indeed, the data collection to prove that milestones and targets have been quite demanding, especially when it requires pulling data from different authorities. So, in a sense, despite the fact the Recovery and Resilience Facility emphasis on a performance-based model, actually, the model still incorporates elements of a cost-based approach, as was also mentioned before by Olga, for instance. And this is primarily because some member states, or actually many member states, have decided to track both indicators to demonstrate the achievement of milestones and targets and gather evidence on expenditure incurred. Why? Because of two reasons mainly. We can simplify in this way. So on one hand, because the National Recovery Plans management and control system often mirror that of the cohesion policy. So equivalent checks and procedures are enforced. And this is, for example, what happened in Lithuania. That was one of the countries that we looked into more depth in the context of the case study. And the second reason is because of the increasingly demand requests, of course, according to member states, for justification on the fulfillment of milestones and targets. And this increasing demand for justification is somehow also linked to the previous issue mentioned in terms of audits, layer of control, and so on. So what we can conclude? We can conclude that the Recovery and Resilience Facility implementation has really served as an occasion for policy learning. And it has created a situation, a stimulus for reflection, even in the context of cohesion policy. Indeed, in the last months, DG Regio has launched some tenders linked and related to the topic of performance-based systems to be transferred in the context of cohesion policy. So the point now is really trying to understand how to exploit the lessons learned in the context of the Recovery and Resilience Facility in relation to performance-based in the context of cohesion policy, trying to exploit further the financing not linked to cost model, that it's also possible to be used in the context of cohesion policy, in order even to overcome the weaknesses that were identified by the European Court of Audit and the literature concerning the experience of the Recovery and Resilience Facility.
Thank you very much, Chiara. We are now very close to the end of the meeting. I would still like to keep a space for few questions. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? There is one question here. Any other question? Another one? Can anyone help me with a mic?
Thank you. I'm Magdalena Sapawa from the EPRS, Parliamentary Research Service. I just have a short question, but maybe it will require long answers. Evolution or revolution? When we talk about changes, about future budget and way of spending your money, would you say that what we experienced so far with the RRF is a basis for a thorough revolution or really very slow evolution as has been so far in the budget? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Roland Kulke. I'm working here in Brussels with Transform Europe. A very short question under the headline of administrative capacity. I'm just coming from a civil society meeting where people told me, coming from Italy, that basically the problem is there's no staff in the public administration who can actually really implement and follow up. And that's just Italy. I know it from parts, you can hear it from my accent, from Germany. We also have it there. It's just money dropped in and there's no stuff. So my question is how to deal with it. You mentioned that it's an open question. Just from your experience, ideas would be very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Any other question from the audience?
Thank you very much. Xu Dong from China Mission. Thank you very much for your presentations. Just a very short, quick question. That is about the future of RF, which was touched upon, but not much. So I would like to know, the RF's short horizon has posed challenges both to the national authorities and also for the implementation of the project, which may take a longer time. But the deadline for the RF at present is 2026. So will the EC specifically, Ms. Meyer, is any consideration or discussion that has happened at the moment for the future of IF? For example, the renewal of this facility or a similar facility will be established after 2026. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we have 3 questions. Who would like to respond? Would like to start?
Thanks. Let me start with the last one, which is an easy one, because the RF says 2026. It has been, as you probably know, a very, very difficult political balance to manage to get to the agreement on the RF, because you had like really basically from the north, Nordic country were okay for putting in place an instrument like this, but it has to be temporary. This was really, really clear. One-off, temporary, no extension. Now, it's true, it's tight, but reopening it would mean that you need unanimity, because you would need to change the own resource decision, which basically would allow the Commission to borrow after 2026. And that, at the current junction, seems very difficult. So at this stage, the Commission is not planning to change this. Now, for the future, of course, that I cannot say much. Of course, the Commission is taking the lessons. This is one of the advantage of this evaluation, and we will have to prepare the next MFF, and work has started, of course, internally of the Commission, start reflection on to what extent is the RF a good model or not. But then it's very too early to say, and in any case, it will be for the next Commission to take the stance, so whether we want it, but we are taking these lessons into account. On administrative capacity, to take it backward, no, I think it's still an issue. I mean, one of the, at least on my side personally, that one of the lessons we had a technical support instrument, which to some extent helped to implementation of reform, but it's a very small instrument. It was managed by another DG, so not necessarily completely integrated into the RF. And we didn't probably have enough of support for the preparation of investment, which is preparing investment pipeline is complicated, so that may be something to manage. On the staffing, I mean, in cohesion funds and even in the RF, the member state have in some cases introduced also some cost, temporary cost for the wage of the civil servant that needed to manage it, and we've allowed it because it's temporary. So it was done to some extent, probably maybe not enough. I think member states didn't realize how complex it would be at that time, but this has been already an issue in cohesion policy, in the sense that there are lots of funding for training or for paying the people that are managing. The problem is that either these guys are trained and they leave the administration, becomes consultant, or when the money disappears, these people are leaving. So it's not so easy. So this is still, but I think at least having more support from Europe may help. But I think you need also to ensure education in your own administration. So I think that we cannot do everything. And on the first question, evolution, I would say revolution is what we have done. I mean, compared to what we were, I mean, we have really changed. In this performance-based approach is very different. Now, of course, we need to make sure that the protection of financial interests of the Union remain a major issue, and that we need to impose it. Whatever we do, we need to make sure we control. The question is what we control, and make sure that what we control makes sense and it's administratively easy. Now, we'll have to see for the future, but as I said, we have taken taking the lessons, but there is also, I mean, in terms of out there, loads of demand at this stage to say, okay, we need to be much more flexible. At this stage, there is not much we can do. I mean, so if the milestones and targets are defined this way, there's no way the Commission can say, sorry, Council, we are deciding that half of it is met, but we decide it's met. It's not going to be possible. So there are limited margin of maneuver that we can take now. We are investigating whether there are anything that we can change at this stage, but it's no change with the regulation, that's for sure.
Thank you. Athanas?
This is a very good question on the evolution and revolution. We just had a discussion also with another colleague. I think it's a point of view. No, it depends on from which point of view you interpret it. Of course, maybe, because I often say it's a revolutionary milestone. Well, in legal terms, most probably not, because we didn't change the treaty, etc., etc. I agree on this. But in terms of macroeconomics, it's, for me, very revolutionary. So we admitted something that 5 or 6 years ago was not possible. There were many ideas about fiscal capacity, what was the name, budget and reform, okay. There were many names, many names, many acronyms, and they were seen as impossible. If you remember, we were discussing this, something that is, I think, clear from the theory. A common currency needs some form of fiscal tool, but was said, no, this is politically completely no-go. And it was then decided, so this was revolutionary. If you see how this changes also the EU budget, for me, this is also revolutionary. How much was the issuance of EU debt before 2020? 5, 10, 20 billion maybe. Now it's 100 billion per year. The contingent liabilities, if we see, previously were mostly guarantees by the EU. To what extent, I don't know, 100 billion or 200 billion. I think now we're at 300 billion, and most contingent liabilities for the future in future years of the IMF will be driven by the RRF. So this is, for me, changing the position of the EU as a sovereign bond issuer, and in many other areas in terms of macro. So in terms of macroeconomics, I think it was pretty revolutionary.
Francesco?
Yeah, so whether it is an evolution or revolution, I mean, I cannot agree more with Athanas when he says depends from what you look at from. And I have a very specific angle, very biased, which I will repeat it again, which is also the point of today. It's what is performance budgeting and why is it important for public administration? I look at it from a public sector perspective, not a private sector perspective, because there is another let's say, ramification of the RRF, the role of promotional banks. I look at it from a public administration perspective. And what our colleague from Spain said in terms of mind shift is very important, and is linked to what I think is the future, which is impact evaluation and monitoring. This is something where the RRF, if well applied, it has really a future. And performance-based budgeting is absolutely key, because one of the limitations that we have witnessed as researchers in this study was the lack of data. Was the difficult, I'm not talking about milestone and target, which are very well tracked, etc. But lack of administrative data to actually, we have 8 case studies, Chiara illustrated one of them. When we try to calculate the return on female employment of investment in childcare, I have to say we spent 2 months to understand where the money of the RRF in one country, in Italy, in which municipality they went. How can we do a proper assessment of the impact on female employment, of the investment in childcare that are badly needed in Italy, if we are not able to use the data to actually have a proper monitoring system? And with this monitoring system, we are also able to say, look, there might be some pressures in terms of cost of materials to construct the infrastructure, but not only on that. Data also on the numbers of available teachers that might be one day enter into this childcare facility, and maybe a little bit readjust, because when we then recreated the database on childcare, and this was possible in Italy, in Poland, for instance, then we could anticipate already, I think it was in May, so we were at the very beginning of this midterm evaluation, we said, look, this milestone will never be met by June. And we could say that once we had the data, but I remember lengthy discussion with the Parliamentary Budgetary Office, which is an independent fiscal institute of Italy, in terms of problems to monitor what were actually the actual implementation on the ground of the investment. And this is to a certain extent related also to what Chiara was saying, the problem. I think it's absolutely a false problem if we criticize the RRF because it's not results. Why? Why would you make a public administration accountable for results? It is not under the control of the government. You can create a facility, but you cannot commit yourself to the number of kids that will. I remember a discussion with Hungary when they said, on an indicator, which is one of the most debated one, which is number of children in childcare facility under the age of 3. And they said, yeah, this indicator is actually, which is based on USILC, if I'm not mistaken, is actually not telling the truth of our country. Why? Because, it depends also on the willingness of family to send their kids to the kindergarten. So why you would like to make a government committed to an outcome indicator? You make it committed to whether or not they build the infrastructure. You cannot make them hold them accountable for the number of kids that they will go that, or to the effects on female employment, because then there are a lot of other external factors that may make it impossible. So I think if we look at the future of performance-based budgeting from this, in my view, that from this a little bit false discussion on whether there are real results or there are outcome, no, you really miss the point. The point is, in my humble perspective, is the culture of monitoring and impact evaluation that this might create. And if I would even say that it's not even useful to think about RRF 2.0 if we lose the opportunity to learn the lesson about monitoring, data, statistical capacity, and evaluations that a performance-based approach is supposed to do by definition. And the limits of the RRF, which are inherent in the public administration limits in the capacity that the national governments have to monitor their own policies, I think this is the very biggest lesson where I also see that there is a kind of unanimous understanding between members that we should continue in that, further develop it, because that's, I think, will be one of the biggest inheritance of the RRF if we are able to learn this lesson. But that's my perspective.
Thank you very much. Just Olga or Chiara, would you like to very quickly add a point and then we close?
Yes, okay, I would start. Yes, I think like as a concept, the RRF, I think it's revolutionary. But it is true that at least in the case of Spain, the expectations were so high that maybe when we come to reality, well, the results are not so fast. No? So, well, this is one thing, no? The thing of the issue of expectations, and that maybe we need more time to develop this or to see the real impact of this new system. We have advanced a lot, but it is a very short period of time to make strong conclusions. And regarding administrative capacity, I would say that, well, in the case of Spain, as I have mentioned before, our plan is so ambitious that we have not increased proportionately the number of public servants or the staff is not proportionate to the dimension of the funds that we are supposed to receive. But in any case, the commitment, the political commitment is very strong, and all the units have been reinforced in all the ministries. And in the regional and local administrations too. And we count with a huge experience accumulated in the management of European funds, despite the differences. And finally, the majority of the funds that are going to be, well, that were contained in the addendum will be channelized through independent institutions, financial institutions with huge experience managing funds. And I would point out the role of the official credit institute in Spain, that during the period of the COVID, it made a really good played a really good role in the crisis. So I think it has a proven experience, and this institution will channelize a great part of the funds. So, well, we are doing things. We are trying to reinforce our administrative capacity, but in any case, obviously, it's a challenge for us.
Thank you. Chiara, just 1 minute.
Yes, on the question about evolution, revolution, I tend to agree with Athenas. So I also think that it can be considered a revolution if we focus on the macro aspects. Instead, I would tend to say that it's an evolution if we just focus on the performance-based approach. Because actually what Geraldine said at the beginning, so the fact that at the beginning the ambition was higher, to me it's already an answer to the fact that something more could have been done. Concerning the point that Francesco raised about the availability of data, I think that in this area, what we realize is that cohesion policy could have been a way to really understand since the beginning that without a proper tracking system of the investments, especially, it will be very difficult in the end to say something meaningful, at least at EU level, in terms of achievements of the facility. And that was, this is something that cohesion policy knows very well, because the monitoring system under cohesion policy has been refined over the years, and nowadays the number of indicators available are really very granular, and it is basically possible to know where investments were implemented on the ground. And this is something that we did not, of course, that when we start the evaluation, it was not the same for the RRF. Last point concerning the administrative capacity, here again, I mean, the issue on administrative capacity were very well known in the context of cohesion policy. So even in these respects, maybe there has been a little bit of optimism bias, I would say, at the beginning, because it is clear that an instrument that is well embedded in the plans to foster administrative capacity is necessary, especially when you have to implement investments. And the possibility to support technical assistance, it's not the same in cohesion policy and the RRF. So it's true that there is this TSI instruments, but it is not really embedded in the plans as it's happened for cohesion policy.
Thanks a lot, Daniel. Really 1 minute.
Yeah. Just to make full circle, I think the three questions are linked actually. So whether it's an evolution or a revolution, the RRF for me is a revolution, clearly, not just because of the performance-based approach, but also by the way the do no significant harm principle is applied, by paying for reforms. These are all new elements. But now it needs evolution though, because I think a performance-based approach would not work unless it is clear what performance is, unless the administrative burden is reduced, and unless there is very clear flexibility on to what extent we can change targets, unit costs, etc. On the second question on absorption capacity, yeah, we also had a question during the evaluation. Yes, it did affect the implementation of the RRF. I think what we observed was not necessarily only problems at central level of the managing authorities, the competent authorities, but at regional authorities level, it got even more difficult. And the last question on the timing, I think Atanas said that it's a bit like running a marathon. Fun fact, I ran a marathon yesterday. And I think that, well, with the RRF, countries are starting from different places. They have very different paces, also due to absorption capacity. And if 2026 is maintained, I'm not sure all countries will finish the marathon.
Thank you very much. It has been a very rich discussion with a lot of aspects that were put to the forefront. I would say that overall that there is a broad assessment that the RRF is being successful, that there is a lot of a widespread support, I would say, for the idea that performance-based is a step forward. However, that there is quite a lot still to be learned in order to improve it and to make it the implementation easier and more prone to serve actually the final outcome. On this, I would like to thank you very much for bearing with us despite the delay. Thank you very much for your interest and have a good evening.